want you to think about how you spent your last 168 hours.
That is a very specific number to ask people to think about.
Right. But seriously, break down the week in your head for a second. Because according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, if you're working in the U.S., you likely spend up to 54 of those hours at your job.
Wow. Yeah, that is a lot.
And you spent maybe 60 hours asleep. So that means outside of literally being unconscious, the workplace is the single most dominant force in your life.
It really is a staggering reality when you map it out like that. I mean, we spend the vast majority of our waking lives navigating these workplace dynamics.
Exactly. It dictates your energy, your mood, basically a massive portion of your time on this planet.
Yeah, and because it consumes so much of our existence, the way work is structured, it impacts our physical health, our mental well-being, and even, our families in really profound ways.
And that massive chunk of our lives is exactly what we are focusing on today. We're doing a deep dive into industrial and organizational psychology.
Also known as IO psychology.
Right. It's basically the scientific study of how human behavior affects work and, conversely, how the workplace affects our psychology.
Which is a huge, huge topic.
It is. So to do this, we're pulling our frameworks directly from section 13.1 of chapter 13 from Psychology 2E. And honestly, looking at the sheer scale of this topic, I am putting myself entirely in your hands today.
Okay, I can take the lead on that.
Yeah, consider me your student today. I mean, where do we even start unpacking the 40-hour work week?
Well, I will gladly step into the role of the lecturer then. To really understand how this field operates, we have to recognize that Section 13.1 doesn't treat it as like one monolithic concept.
Okay, so it's broken up.
Yeah, it is highly specialized. We first need to break down the three main traditional branches of IO psychology just to see how they map onto a worker's actual experience.
So what is the first entry point for an employee?
The first is industrial psychology. You can think of this as the gateway or maybe the filter.
Like the hiring phase.
Exactly. It focuses heavily on analyzing job requirements and assessing individuals to see if they can actually, meet those requirements.
Okay, so matching the resume to the job description.
Right. It's the branch dealing with the mechanics of hiring, the initial training, and evaluating employee performance.
That makes sense.
And because it is so heavily involved in selecting candidates and writing performance reviews, industrial psychology is deeply intertwined with the legalities of hiring, specifically making sure that tests and criteria do not result in discrimination.
Got it. It's the initial screening and onboarding. So what happens once a person is actually inside the company?
Well, that is where the second pillar takes over, which is organizational psychology.
Okay, and what's the focus there?
This discipline is interested in the social and psychological environment. It studies how the relationships among employees affect both the individual and, the overall performance of the business.
So less about the specific job tasks and more about the culture.
Precisely. This is where we look at worker satisfaction, motivation, and organizational commitment. It analyzes different management and leadership styles, the social norms of the office, things like that.
The overarching corporate culture, basically.
Yeah. And crucially, because it focuses on worker well-being and interpersonal relationships, organizational psychology is the branch that tackles serious behavioral issues like workplace harassment and workplace violence.
Oh, wow. Okay, so we have the hiring filter and we have the social environment. What's the third branch?
The third is human factor psychology, though it's often referred to as ergonomics in Europe.
Ergonomics. Okay, so chairs and desks.
Yes, exactly. This branch shifts the focus to the physical interaction between workers and their tools. It studies how to engineer work environments to optimize productivity, safety, and physical health.
Right, which makes sense if you're sitting at a desk for thousands of hours a year.
Exactly. It can be as straightforward as designing the physical fit of your desk, your chair, and your computer, but it also scales up to highly complex systems.
Like what?
Yeah.
What kind of complex system?
Like designing airplane cockpits or air traffic control software.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Figuring out how accurately and quickly a human brain can interpret complex visual displays without making a fatal error.
Wait, okay, so if I'm tracking this, let me try a dating analogy here.
Go for it.
Is industrial psychology basically the matchmaking algorithm and like the awkward first dates where you figure out if you're a fit?
Yes.
Then organizational psychology is the actual marriage, the daily dynamics, communication styles, relationship counseling.
Exactly.
And human factors is the physical house you buy together.
Right.
Making sure the kitchen counters aren't so low that they destroy your back.
That is a phenomenal way to visualize it. I
Right.
love that. And taking your analogy a step further, the matchmaking industrial requires a strict legal contract.
Right.
The marriage organizational requires constant maintenance of the culture so things don't turn toxic.
Yeah.
And the house human factors requires tools and environments that physically support the people living inside it.
That perfectly connects them. It really shows how these three distinct areas form, like a complete ecosystem for the worker.
They absolutely do.
But, taking a step back, the textbook outlines how this field doesn't just stop at the door of the corporate office. It expands out into human well-being and even global crises, which feels a lot bigger than just optimizing an office layout.
It does. And this is where the field becomes incredibly impactful on a personal day-to-day level. Beyond those three core pillars, we have Occupational Health Psychology, or OHP.
Okay, what does OHP cover?
This discipline deals specifically with the stress, diseases, and psychological disorders that affect employees as a direct result of their workplace environment.
So like treating the job itself as a potential pathogen, something that can literally make you sick.
Precisely. OHP examines how an organization affects the overall quality of a worker's life. And the mechanism that is vital to understand here is the concept of spillover.
Spillover, like bringing work home.
Yes. OHP recognizes that the psychological toll of a toxic boss or an overwhelming workload doesn't magically evaporate the second you clock out.
Right. I mean, we've all been there.
Yeah, it's spilled over into your personal life, it elevates your cortisol levels at home, disrupts your sleep, strains your family relationships.
So what's the fix?
The ultimate goal of an occupational health psychologist is to mitigate that spillover. By improving the overall health and well-being of the individual, you inherently increase the resilience and productivity of the entire organization.
Yeah, if you have ever brought the stress of a bad day at the office home to the dinner table, you know exactly how real that spillover effect is. It just infects everything.
It really does.
But you also mentioned global crises earlier. How does workplace psychology scale up to something like a natural disaster?
Right. That brings us to humanitarian work psychology, or HWP. This is a much newer frontier.
How new are we talking?
It was basically the brainchild of a small group of IO psychologists who met at a conference in 2009. They realized their frameworks could be used to help underserved and marginalized populations.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Yeah, they formally organized in 2012. It's still a relatively small coalition with about 300 members worldwide, but its impact is incredible.
I am genuinely surprised by this humanitarian angle. Because as the student here, my assumption is usually that business psychology is a tool for corporations to just squeeze maximum productivity out of their labor force.
Right, that's the common perception.
But HWP sounds like a workplace Peace Corps. How does organizational psychology actually help in a humanitarian crisis?
Well, imagine a massive disaster relief zone like the aftermath of an earthquake. The immediate instinct is to just hand out food and water.
Sure, survival basics.
Right. But an HWP expert looks at the human infrastructure. They figure out the logistics and human dynamics of delivering that aid efficiently. And even more importantly, they focus on what they call KSAs. Knowledge, skills, and abilities. Instead of just treating the symptom by handing out supplies, they train local community leaders in supply chain management, effective communication, project organization.
Okay, so they're treating the disaster response as a temporary organization that needs to be optimized.
Yes. And by teaching those KSAs, they ensure the intervention outlasts the crisis. If you teach someone how to organize a complex distribution network or operate a specific type of widespread technology, those skills stay with that individual for their entire lifetime.
Oh, wow. I never thought about it like that.
Yeah, so after the relief agencies pack up and leave, that community now has the human infrastructure and the skills to build local businesses and alter their economic trajectory. It is about permanent empowerment, not just a temporary Band-Aid.
That is a brilliant application of the science. So we have this very modern, holistic, and even humanitarian view of workplace psychology today.
Yes, today.
Right, but to understand how we got here, Section 13.1 takes us back to the early 20th century. And the origins of this field seem a lot more ruthless than humanitarian.
Well, ruthless is the perfect word for it. At the turn of the 20th century, the focus was purely on mechanical efficiency and maximum output. The worker was largely viewed as an interchangeable part.
It's a cog in the machine.
Exactly. A major turning point was an engineer named Frederick Taylor. In 1911, he published a hugely influential book called The Principles of Scientific Management.
What was his main theory?
Taylor believed you could completely re-engineer the workplace using rigorous time and motion studies to maximize employer profits, which he argued would also benefit the employee through higher wages.
This is where we get the famous heavy iron ingots experiment.
Correct. Taylor observed workers moving heavy iron ingots at a steel company,
Mhm.
and instead of just telling them to work harder, he analyzed their physical movements and, crucially, implemented mandatory timed rest breaks.
Timed breaks, that sounds almost modern.
Well, he stood there with a stopwatch, dictating exactly when a worker should lift, when they should walk, and when they must sit down and rest, completely regardless of how they actually felt. But the results were astounding. Worker productivity skyrocketed from moving 12.5 tons of iron a day to 47.0 tons per day.
47 tons. That is almost a four-fold increase, just by treating the human body's energy expenditure like a math equation.
And the math worked. The workers reported less fatigue and received increased wages because they were paid by the ton. Meanwhile, the company's cost plummeted from 9.2 cents to 3.9 cents per ton. It looked like an absolute triumph of efficiency.
But wait, if I am a worker and a guy with a stopwatch is micromanaging my every breath and telling me I don't know the best way to do my own job, wouldn't that completely destroy morale?
Yes.
Treating humans like mindless robots has to backfire eventually.
It absolutely caused massive friction. Taylor faced intense criticism, especially from labor unions and worker advocates. His underlying philosophy explicitly assumed that workers were fundamentally lazy.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he thought they lacked the intelligence to optimize their own labor. In his view, only a manager was capable of determining the most efficient way to work.
So it completely stripped the worker of any agency or creativity.
Exactly. It maximized physical output, but it completely ignored worker autonomy and basic human psychology.
So who is the counterbalance to that purely mechanical view?
For that, we have to look at Lillian Gilbreth, who is widely considered the mother of modern management. She and her husband also utilized time and motion studies, but Gilbreth approached it very differently.
How so?
She heavily investigated employee fatigue and the psychological stress of time management. She published The Psychology of Management in 1914. She recognized early on that workers were motivated by more than just money. They were motivated by job satisfaction and the feeling of a well-designed workflow.
The textbook mentioned her inventions, and it honestly blew my mind. She applied these industrial concepts to the home, didn't she?
She did. She essentially turned the household into a highly efficient factory floor to reduce the daily fatigue of domestic labor. You can thank Lillian Gilbreth for the idea of putting shelves inside refrigerator doors.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and she invented the foot pedal trash can. She wasn't just making gadgets, she was minimizing unnecessary human motion.
Right, because if you don't have to bend down to open a trash can 50 times a day, you conserve physical energy and reduce strain.
Exactly. She was an absolute trailblazer. She even became the first woman to join the American Society of Mechanical Engineers in 1926. Her work really laid the foundation for modern human factors psychology.
It wasn't just factories and kitchens driving this research, though. The military played a massive role in standardizing these psychological tests.
Oh, they essentially birthed modern human resources. When the U.S. entered World War I in 1917, the military faced a logistical nightmare.
Drafting millions of people all at once.
Right. They had to draft, sort, and assign millions of men. And many of these were farm boys who had never seen a factory line, let alone a trench. So Robert Yerkes, the president of the American Psychological Association, organized a group to develop rapid screening methods.
The Army Alpha test, right?
Yes, the Army Alpha test to measure mental abilities and leadership potential.
But wait, what do you do with millions of draftees who can't read?
That was the second innovation. They created the Army Beta test, which was a nonverbal version designed specifically for draftees who were illiterate or did not speak English.
How did that work?
They used pictures and symbols to test cognitive function without relying on language. It was the first massive, standardized application of industrial psychology for personnel selection, and it proved that you could systematically categorize human potential on a national scale.
Okay, so up to this point in the timeline, the early 20th century, the focus is still very mechanical. It's about testing brains, counting motions, moving iron. But Section 13.1 details a very specific moment where researchers realized their math equations were missing a massive variable.
The human element.
Right, the moment they realized humans are deeply psychological beings.
Yes, and this is perhaps the most famous narrative in all of IO psychology. From 1929 to 1932, a researcher named Elton Mayo led a series of studies at a Western electric plant near Chicago called the Hawthorne Works.
And this changed everything.
It did. These studies mark the true origin of organizational psychology because they accidentally pulled the field out of the realm of pure mechanics and into the complex world of human motivation.
This started as a basic lighting experiment, right?
It did. The researchers wanted to test the effects of the physical work environment. Following the logic of the time, they thought, well, if we make the factory lighting brighter and easier to see in, will productivity go up?
And did it?
It did. They increased the lighting and productivity improved. But here is the mechanism that confused them. They then decreased the lighting, plunging the factory floor into near darkness. And productivity still went up. In fact, pretty much any change they made to the physical environment resulted in a spike in output.
Wait, so if I'm working on a complex spreadsheet and my boss is standing behind me with a clipboard, you could turn off half the lights in the office and I'd still type faster.
Basically, yeah.
Is the Hawthorne Effect essentially scientific proof of the look busy, the boss is coming phenomenon?
That is a hilarious way to phrase it, but it captures the exact mechanism. What the researchers realized was that the physical changes, like the lighting, were entirely irrelevant. The psychological and social factors were what was actually driving the output.
Because they knew they were being watched?
Exactly. The workers were performing better simply because they knew they were being observed by researchers and supervisors. They were receiving attention, and they felt their work mattered to the people studying them.
So attention equals performance.
Yes. This became known as the Hawthorne Effect. It proved that human interaction, supervisor style, and the mere fact of being observed drastically alter human behavior. It completely broke the Taylorist model that workers are just lazy machines.
It showed they're social creatures.
Right, social creatures who care deeply about how they are perceived. It is a concept that endures today. Anytime you run an experiment on humans, you have to control for the Hawthorne effect, because the simple act of paying attention to a participant will change their behavior.
That is a massive paradigm shift.
It changed everything. And building on that realization, in the 1930s, a researcher named Kurt Lewin started deeply studying employees' feelings about their jobs. He coined the term group dynamics.
What did you focus on?
Lewin researched how different leadership styles, team structures, and cooperation impacted the workplace. He essentially proved that the social environment of the workplace is just as critical to productivity as the physical environment.
So once the field realized that the workplace is an inherently psychological and social environment, how did that shift things moving into the modern era? Because, I mean, the way we work today is highly regulated compared to a Chicago factory in 1929.
Well, the field experienced another boom during and after World War II, focusing heavily on job classification and team morale. But the true modern turning point came with the intersection of psychology and the law in the 1960s.
The Civil Rights Act.
Yes. When Congress passed the 1964 Civil Rights Act, Title VII established equal employment opportunity. This law protects employees against discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin.
Yeah.
And looking at this impartially exactly as the textbook lays out, organizations suddenly had to adjust to a completely new social, political, and legal climate.
I want to look at the timeline of that, actually. Did the 1964 Civil Rights Act force IO psychologists to change how they tested people? Or did the prior research of IO psychologists prove to lawmakers that those tests were biased in the first place?
It was a highly reciprocal relationship. Concerns about the fairness of employment tests had been brewing since the massive scaling of tests back in World War II. Researchers within IO psychology were already evaluating how ethnic and gender biases were baked into various assessments.
Okay, so the scientific research was already highlighting the flaws.
Exactly. But when the Civil Rights Act passed, it provided the legal mandate that forced organizations to actually implement the science. IO psychologists suddenly became essential.
They needed them to stay out of legal trouble.
Right. Companies needed them to ensure their hiring practices, standardized tests, and performance appraisals were legally compliant, fair, and truly measuring job ability rather than reflecting historical societal biases.
The science informed the law, and then the law created a massive demand for the science, which honestly explains why this field is so huge today.
The scale is massive. Today, IO psychology is vital for any organization trying to compete on a global level. Companies have incredibly diverse workforces. They need to understand the psychological complexity of managing people from different backgrounds across different time zones.
And they need to know how to genuinely motivate workers, not just time their motions with a stopwatch.
Exactly. Because it is so critical to business survival, it is a highly lucrative field. The Society for Industrial and Organizational Psychology has thousands of members. The textbook notes that, on average, a person with a master's degree in IO psychology earns over $80,000 a year, and those with a doctorate earn over $110,000.
Wow. Well, I am officially shedding my student persona now. Thank you, lecturer, for guiding us through that history.
You're very welcome.
Because looking back at this journey, it is wild to realize just how much invisible psychological architecture goes into our 40-plus hour work weeks. Nothing is accidental.
No, not at all.
From the ergonomic chair you sit in, thanks to Lillian Gilbreth applying factory efficiency to reduce fatigue, to the very specific, legally compliant way your job interview is structured, right down to the Hawthorne Effect, making you sit up a little straighter when your boss walks past your desk.
It's all connected.
Every aspect of your workday is the result of over a century of observation.
We truly went from measuring the physical limits of moving iron ingots to studying the emotional complexities of global team dynamics. It is just a constant evolution of understanding human potential.
It really is. And, that leaves us with something fascinating to consider about the future of that evolution. Because building on the Hawthorne Effect, that proven psychological mechanism where we perform better simply because we know we are being watched, I want you to think about the modern era of remote work and artificial intelligence.
Oh, that's an interesting angle.
Right. If your supervisor is no longer a human being standing with a clipboard on a factory floor, but an AI algorithm silently tracking your keystrokes and mouse movements in your home office, does the Hawthorne Effect still work?
That is a great question.
Does an algorithm trigger the same social desire to perform? Or does the total lack of a human observer completely break the psychological spell of productivity? Just something to think about the next time you wiggle your mouse to keep your screen awake.